How much damage can prejudice do before it destroys everything? When a bank manager's bias blinds her to the truth, she makes a career-ending mistake, belittling a man who secretly holds her future in his hands. But what happens when the tables turn, and her arrogance faces its ultimate reckoning? A wealthy man walks into a bank ready to invest millions. But instead of respect, he's met with disdain. The manager, confident in her judgment, dismisses him outright. What she doesn't know. This man is her new boss, the CEO of the very bank she works for. And her actions are about to change her life forever. Welcome to Just Dark, where we uncover the hidden stories of prejudice, power, and change. Don't miss a single story. Subscribe now and join the conversation that matters. Meet Mr. Toby James, the newly appointed CEO of one of the nation's most prestigious banks. Toby had built his fortune through determination, resilience, and an unshakable belief in fairness. But his new role came with a challenge: fixing a bank notorious for its reputation as an exclusive club where discrimination was quietly accepted. For Toby, it wasn't just business, it was personal. A close friend had recently shared his experience of being treated unfairly at one of the bank's branches, simply because he was black. Determined to see the truth for himself, Toby decided to take matters into his own hands. What happened next would expose the deep-rooted bias within the system, and send a powerful message to everyone watching. It was a typical morning at one of the city's most exclusive bank branches. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet efficiency, plush carpets muffling footsteps, marble counters gleaming under soft lighting, and impeccably dressed staff attending to equally well-heeled clients. Then the glass doors swung open, and in walked a man who didn't quite fit the usual mold. He wore a well-tailored suit, understated but perfectly cut, paired with a calm and confident demeanor. This was Mr. Toby James, but today no one knew him as the bank's CEO. Today he was just another potential client, or so they thought. Miss Helen, the branch manager, looked up from her desk as Mr. James approached. Her sharp eyes scanned him from head to toe, and in that moment her judgment was made. He didn't belong, at least not in her eyes. She plastered on a professional smile, but her tone carried a hint of condescension. "Good morning," she said, her words crisp but lacking warmth. "How can I assist you?" Mr. James offered a polite smile. "I'm looking to open an account. I have some substantial funds I'd like to invest." His voice was steady, his choice of words deliberate. Miss Helen raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "I see. Well, perhaps one of our less standardized branches might be better suited for your needs. This location specializes in high-net-worth clients." Her words hung in the air, thinly veiled in politeness but heavy with dismissal. Mr. James didn't flinch. Instead he pressed on, his tone measured. "I understand," he said. "But I'm here because I've heard this branch has the expertise I'm looking for. You see, I'm looking to invest millions and I'd like to ensure it's handled properly." For a brief moment Miss Helen froze. "Millions?" She glanced at him again, but her expression didn't soften. Instead she offered a tight-lipped smile. "I'm sure you would," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But I do think you'll find our other locations more accommodating." She gestured toward the exit, making it clear their conversation was over. Mr. James gave a small nod, his expression betraying nothing. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving Miss Helen with no idea of the storm brewing just beyond her polished desk. The bank had passed its first test, and it had failed spectacularly. The morning began like any other at the high-end branch. Staff moved briskly, arranging papers, greeting early clients, and preparing for the day ahead. But there was an undeniable tension in the air. A few hushed whispers floated between employees as a group of corporate executives arrived unexpectedly, led by a man whose commanding presence immediately turned heads, Mr. Toby James. The team was promptly called into the conference room. Curious but wary, they filed in, their chatter quieting as they took their seats. Miss Helen, ever composed, assumed her usual place at the head of the table. Her posture was as confident as ever, though a flicker of curiosity betrayed her. She hadn't yet realized why corporate had descended upon her branch unannounced. The room stilled as Mr. James stepped forward. Clearing his throat, he surveyed the team with calm authority. "Good morning," he began, his voice measured but firm. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Toby James. I am the CEO of this institution." The weight of his words seemed to shift the very air in the room. All eyes turned to Miss Helen, who sat frozen. Her confident mask cracked as the realization hit. Her lips parted in shock, but no words came. Mr. James continued, his tone unwavering. "Yesterday I visited this branch, not as your CEO but as a client. A man seeking to invest significant funds into this bank. What I experienced was more than just poor service. It was a display of prejudice, plain and simple. A silence followed, heavy and deafening. Staff exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Helen, visibly pale, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her earlier composure now a distant memory. Turning directly to her, Mr. James said, "Miss Helen, you made it abundantly clear that I was not welcome. You judged me based solely on my appearance, dismissed me without a second thought, and even suggested that I'd be better served at another branch. Do you recall?" Miss Helen's voice faltered as she stammered, I didn't mean to offend. I was only trying to." Mr. James raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "What you did wasn't just offensive, Miss Helen, it was unacceptable. It goes against the very principles this institution is built upon. As professionals, and more importantly as human beings, we must be better than this." The weight of his words filled the room. Miss Helen looked down at her hands, her confident facade completely shattered. Her colleagues sat stiffly, their faces reflecting a mixture of discomfort and quiet acknowledgement of the truths being laid bare. Mr. James addressed the entire room now, his voice resolute but laced with disappointment. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every client who has walked through these doors and felt unwelcome. It's about the culture we foster here and the message we send. That message must change, starting today." The room was silent except for the faint sound of a clock ticking in the background. Miss Helen sat motionless, the reality of her actions and their consequences sinking in. There was no escaping the reckoning that had finally come. The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels almost tangible, pressing down on everyone present. The air seemed to grow heavier with every passing second as Mr. James continued to speak, his calm, steady voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Miss Helen sat frozen in her seat, her confidence, the same confidence that had carried her through years of professional authority, crumbled under the weight of the moment. Her once imposing demeanor was replaced by a visible unease. She clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white against the polished table, as though bracing herself for what was to come. The staff seated around her shifted uncomfortably, some casting quick glances her way while others stared straight ahead, their expressions unreadable. Everyone could sense it, this wasn't just a routine meeting. Something significant was happening and they were all witnesses. Mr. James paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch, amplifying the gravity of his words. Then, with a voice as firm as it was resolute, he delivered his verdict. "Miss Helen," he said, his tone measured but unyielding, "your actions yesterday were unacceptable. As the leader of this institution, it is my duty to ensure that every client who walks through our doors is treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived status." Miss Helen kept her gaze fixed firmly on the table, her lips pressed into a tight line. Her composure was unraveling, and for the first time she looked small, diminished by the enormity of the moment. "Effective immediately," Mr. James continued, "you are relieved of your position as branch manager. You will be reassigned to a teller position. Additionally, you will undergo mandatory diversity and customer service training." A sharp intake of breath broke the silence, a subtle but audible reaction from one of the staff members. The demotion of a branch manager was almost unheard of, and the weight of the decision sent an unmistakable message. This was not business as usual. Miss Helen's head snapped up, and for a moment her composed exterior faltered completely. Her voice, now shaky, broke the quiet. "Mr. James? I can do better. Please give me another chance." Mr. James regarded her with a steady, unreadable expression. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet determination. "This is your second chance, Miss Helen," he said. "I believe in growth, but change requires effort. You have the opportunity to reflect, to learn, and to do better. Whether you take that opportunity is up to you." The words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. Miss Helen nodded slowly, her defiance replaced by resignation. She said nothing more, and the room remained thick with tension. But Mr. James wasn't done. He turned his attention to the rest of the team, his voice now carrying a commanding tone that demanded their full attention. "Let me be clear," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "This institution will no longer tolerate prejudice in any form. Our clients come to us with trust, expecting fairness, respect, and professionalism. They deserve nothing less. We are here to serve, not to judge." The staff sat up straighter, their expressions shifting from apprehension to quiet determination. His words weren't just an admonishment, they were a call to action. Mr. James's tone softened slightly as he added, "Change starts now. It starts with each of us, every single day. Let this moment be a reminder. Our actions matter, not just for our careers but for the people we serve and the example we set for others. He let the final words linger, allowing the gravity of his message to sink in. Then, without another word, he stepped out of the room, leaving behind a group of staff members grappling with the significance of what had just transpired. Miss Helen remained seated, staring down at her hands, her new reality sinking in. The room buzzed with a quiet intensity, the staff exchanging glances filled with unspoken questions and resolutions. One thing was clear: the old ways were over. A new chapter was beginning, one defined not by prejudice or arrogance, but by respect, accountability, and the promise of better days ahead. Weeks turned into months, and the once luxurious hum of the branch began to carry a different tune, one filled with whispers, unease, and the ripple effects of Mr. James's visit. Miss Helen, now in her new role as a teller, stood behind the counter she once ruled over. Each day, she was reminded of the stark contrast between her former position and her current one. For some, such a shift might have been a humbling experience, an opportunity to grow and reevaluate. But not for Miss Helen. To her, she saw the CEO as just one more black person who had no right to threat a white person that way. To her, the demotion wasn't a chance to learn. It was a humiliation, a punishment she believed she didn't deserve. The sting of losing her authority festered, twisting into bitterness that seeped into her work. She began to treat her position as beneath her, approaching tasks with barely concealed disdain. Clients who once admired her polished demeanor now found themselves on the receiving end of her cold indifference. And it wasn't just indifference, her bitterness had a pattern. Clients who didn't fit her narrow, biased perception of who belonged in the bank's exclusive halls were met with curt responses, dismissive gestures, and thinly veiled contempt. At first, the complaints were sporadic. A customer here, a client there, quietly voicing discomfort or dissatisfaction. But soon the murmurs grew louder. Feedback forms began to describe the same troubling behavior: rude, unapproachable, condescending. Worse still, some included words like discriminatory. The bank's internal review team took notice. They started watching her interactions, tracking patterns, and quietly collecting evidence. A few brave clients even left detailed accounts, pointing out moments where Miss Helen's tone changed sharply when dealing with individuals who didn't fit her image of wealth or worth. Among the staff, the whispers were growing. Some avoided her altogether, unwilling to risk her sharp tongue. Others, once loyal to her as their manager, began to re-evaluate their own actions during her tenure. Had they, too, perpetuated the exclusionary culture she fostered? Yet, Miss Helen remained defiant. When questioned about the complaints, she dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "Clients are too sensitive these days," she'd scoff, her tone as sharp as ever. "I'm just doing my job. If they can't handle professionalism, that's their problem." But the numbers didn't lie, and neither did the growing mountain of reports against her. The exclusive branch, once known for its polished reputation, now found itself under scrutiny. And at the center of it all was Miss Helen, a symbol of what could go wrong when prejudice went unchecked and accountability failed to take root. Her downfall wasn't just a personal story. It became a cautionary tale for everyone in the bank, a stark reminder that opportunities for redemption can only be seized by those willing to change. As her actions continued to alienate clients and staff alike, the message was clear: change, when resisted, can only lead to one outcome. It was a gray morning when the corporate team returned to the branch, this time without warning. The weight of their presence was unmistakable as they filed into the conference room. Staff members exchanged nervous glances, their unease filling the air. But for Miss Helen, it wasn't unease she felt, it was indignation. In her mind, she had been wronged, and no amount of feedback or complaints could convince her otherwise. Once again the staff gathered, and once again, it was Mr. Toby James who took the lead. He stood at the head of the room, his calm demeanor masking the gravity of what was about to unfold. He scanned the room, his eyes resting briefly on Miss Helen, who sat with arms crossed, her expression defiant. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. James began. "I've called this meeting to address a matter of great importance. Over the past several weeks, we've been closely monitoring the feedback coming from this branch. While there have been many positive interactions, there are also patterns of behavior that cannot be ignored." The staff sat silently, their attention fixed on him. He continued, his tone growing sharper. "Miss Helen, despite the opportunity for growth that was given to you, we've received numerous reports that indicate ongoing issues with your conduct. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a troubling pattern, a pattern that goes against the values this institution stands for." Miss Helen sat up straighter, her face flushed. "Mr. James," she began, her voice trembling with anger, "this isn't fair. Those reports are exaggerated. I'm just doing my job." Mr. James raised a hand, his expression firm. "Miss Helen, this isn't about fairness. It's about accountability. You were given the chance to learn, to reflect, and to change. Instead, you chose to double down on behaviors that harm our clients and tarnish our reputation." The silence that followed was deafening. Even those who had sympathized with Miss Helen in the past now avoided her gaze. Everyone in the room understood the gravity of what was about to happen. Mr. James continued, his voice heavy with finality. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. This institution has no place for prejudice or disrespect. I hope you'll take this time to reflect on how your actions have brought you here." Miss Helen sat frozen, her defiance melting into disbelief. She opened her mouth to protest but found no words. The weight of her choices, and their consequences, had finally caught up with her. As she stood to leave the room, there was no applause, no satisfaction from the staff, only a quiet understanding of the lesson they had all witnessed. Mr. James turned back to the team, his voice softening. "Let this serve as a reminder to us all," he said. "Every client who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect. No exceptions. Change isn't easy, but it is necessary. And it starts with us." As the meeting ended, the staff returned to their workstations, the weight of the moment still lingering. And in that silence, a new chapter began for the branch. A chapter where respect and dignity would be the foundation of everything they did. Weeks turned into months and the branch began to transform. The shadow Miss Helen had cast over the bank slowly lifted, replaced by an atmosphere of openness and respect. The staff, now more mindful of their interactions, took Mr. James's words to heart. Diversity training sessions became more than just a requirement. They sparked conversations, encouraged empathy, and forged a deeper understanding among the team. Clients noticed the change too. Feedback shifted from hesitant remarks to glowing reviews. The branch was no longer seen as exclusive in the way it once had been, a place where only certain people felt welcome. Instead, it became a model for inclusivity, a symbol of how institutions could evolve. As for Mr. James, his decision to step into the branch that day as an undercover client had proven more impactful than he could have imagined. He hadn't just uncovered a problem. He had set in motion a culture of accountability and growth. And while Miss Helen's story ended in her dismissal, her actions, and the consequences that followed, served as a powerful lesson for everyone who remained. In his office one afternoon, Mr. James reflected on the journey. He thought of his close friend who had inspired him to take a stand, of the pain and prejudice that had gone unnoticed for too long. And he thought of the power of leadership, not just to enforce rules but to inspire real, lasting change. "It's not enough to call out injustice," he often said in meetings. "We have to build systems that prevent it and foster a culture that values every person who walks through our doors." As the story spread across the organization, it became more than a cautionary tale, it became a turning point. A story of reckoning, of leadership, and of the courage it takes to confront prejudice head-on. And so, the legacy of Mr. Toby James grew, not just as a CEO, but as a leader who dared to challenge the status quo and demand better. His story, shared within the company and beyond, became a call to action for others. A reminder that changes begins with accountability, grows with empathy, and flourishes when we treat every person with dignity. Don't leave without subscribing and letting us know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps us create even more powerful and meaningful stories for you. If this story resonated with you or sparked important thoughts, share it to spread awareness and inspire conversations. Remember, what goes around comes around. Until next time, take care and stay engaged.